So that all-for-nothing mom of yours has that much money? Those words. Those goddamn words still echo in my mind like a death sentence I never deserved. My daughter-in-law's voice, sharp as a blade, cutting through my home, like she owned every brick, every breath of air in it. I froze right there in the kitchen, my hands still covered in flour from making their dinner. Their fucking dinner. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst right out of my chest and land on the floor next to the bread I was kneading for people who saw me as nothing more than a walking ATM. And my son. My own flesh and blood. The boy I carried for 9 months, labored 36 hours to bring into this world, the child I sacrificed everything for. He didn't defend me. He laughed. He actually laughed like it was the funniest joke he'd ever heard. Sweetheart, take mom's card. She's got about $130,000 saved up. Just like that. Like my life's work was pocket change to be tossed around. $130,000. You hear that number and you think, oh, she's rich, she's got it made. But you don't know what that number represents. You don't know the blood, sweat, and tears that went into every single dollar. You don't know the meals I skipped, the clothes I mended instead of replaced, the birthdays I celebrated with homemade cake because store-bought was too expensive. You don't know shit about what that money cost me. That card, the one he handed over like it was a goddamn business card, I built that account with 40 years of hell. 40 years of my knees screaming as I scrubbed other people's floors until they gleamed. 40 years of my fingers bleeding as I sewed clothes late into the night, squinting under a dim lamp because I couldn't afford better lighting. 40 years of choosing between heating the house or buying groceries, between new shoes or keeping the lights on. I held that card with pride once. Real pride. The kind that comes from knowing you've earned every cent through honest work, through sacrifice, through sheer determination not to be another statistic, another old woman dependent on handouts. But now, watching my son pass it to his wife like it was nothing, like I was nothing, in that moment, something inside me didn't just crack. It shattered completely. Standing there in that kitchen, flour on my hands like the dust of my own grave, I listened to them through the wall. Every word was a nail in the coffin of whatever respect I thought they had for me. The casual tone of my son's voice, that hurt more than any insult Grace could throw at me. Because insults from strangers bounce off you, but betrayal from your own child? That lodges itself in your heart like shrapnel, and it never comes out. She's old. She doesn't need all that money, Grace said, and I wanted to scream until my throat bled. Old? I'm 69 years old, not dead. Not invisible. Not worthless. I still have dreams that wake me up at night, still have needs that go beyond the basic survival they think should satisfy me, still have a life to live that extends beyond their convenience. But in my own home, under the roof I helped pay for with decades of backbreaking labor, I'd become nothing but a wallet with wrinkles. A burden with a bank account. A convenient ATM machine that occasionally needed feeding and maintenance. My chest tightened like a vice, and for a terrifying moment I thought I was having a heart attack. The pain was that real, that sharp, that consuming. But it wasn't my heart failing from age, it was my heart breaking from the cruelty of the people I loved most. The people I'd given my entire life to support, protect, and nurture. The people who now saw my existence as nothing more than an inconvenience with a healthy bank balance. Those decades that built that balance, you want to know what they really looked like? Let me paint you a picture of what real sacrifice means, what it looks like when a woman gives up everything for her child and gets nothing but contempt in return. Picture a woman, younger then, but already tired from carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Picture her sitting at a sewing machine from sunrise to midnight, her back permanently curved from hunching over fabric for hours on end. My fingers were constantly pricked with needle marks that never fully healed, tiny scars layered upon tiny scars until my fingertips looked like they'd been through a war. And maybe they had. I sewed wedding dresses for brides who would throw them away after one day, These elaborate creations that cost more than I made in 3 months, while I wore the same 3 dresses for years until they fell apart at the seams. I sewed baby clothes for wealthy mothers who could afford to buy new for every growth spurt, while my own son wore hand-me-downs and clothes I pieced together from scraps I found in factory dumpsters. I remember his face when other kids made fun of his strange clothes, the clothes I'd stayed up all night making because I couldn't bear to see him go without. I cleaned houses until my knees gave out completely, until standing up became an act of willpower rather than a simple movement. Rich people's houses, mansions where they'd leave messes just to watch me clean them up, where they'd accidentally spill wine on carpets right after I'd finished cleaning them, where they'd forget to pay me on time, knowing I was too desperate to complain, too afraid of losing the work to stand up for myself, where their children would look at me like I was invisible, like I was part of the furniture that happened to move around and scrub things. One house in particular still haunts me. Mrs. Richardson's place, a woman who inherited her wealth and spent her days creating work for people like me. She'd dump ashtrays on freshly mopped floors, leave dirty dishes in every room of the house, track mud through the hallways with her expensive shoes. And when I'd finished cleaning, exhausted and aching, she'd find something to complain about, some reason to dock my pay. The baseboards aren't clean enough, she'd say, knowing I'd spent an hour on my hands and knees scrubbing them. The windows have streaks. The bathroom doesn't smell fresh enough. But I endured it all because Edward needed school supplies, needed clothes that fit, needed opportunities one never had. I endured the humiliation, the physical pain, the constant degradation because I had a purpose bigger than my own comfort. I was building something. A future for my son, a bank account that would ensure he never had to live the way I did. I saved dollars in envelopes under my mattress because I didn't trust banks at first. The mattress was old and lumpy, but it was safe, and those envelopes were my security blanket. 50 cents here, $1 there, whatever I could scrape together after paying for Edward's school supplies, his clothes, his activities, his dreams. Every coin represented a choice, his future over my comfort, his opportunities over my rest, his happiness over my own basic needs. I remember counting those bills late at night, smoothing out the wrinkled ones, organizing them by denomination. It was a ritual that gave me hope, proof that I was building something lasting. $20 became 50, 50 became 100, and slowly, painfully, over decades of sacrifice, it grew into something substantial. Something I was proud of. Winter nights when I chose to keep the heat low to save money, wrapping myself in every blanket I owned while Edward slept warm in his room. Summer days when I walked to work in the blazing heat because bus fare was money I could save instead. Meals where I'd give Edward the good portions and tell him I wasn't hungry, surviving on scraps and leftovers while he grew strong and healthy. I whispered to myself on those long nights when my body ached and my soul felt empty that money wasn't luck. It was my life's proof that I endured. Every dollar in that account was a scar, a memory, a moment when I chose to keep going instead of giving up. It was proof that I mattered, that my work had value, that my sacrifices meant something beyond the moment they were made. That money represented Christmas mornings when Edward got presents and I got the joy of watching his face light up, even though those presents meant I'd be eating rice and beans for the next month. It represented school field trips I funded with money I should have spent on my own medical bills. It represented graduation gifts and birthday celebrations and all the normal childhood experiences I was determined to give him, no matter what it cost me. But listening to them talk about it like it was monopoly money, like it was theirs by right, like I was just holding onto it temporarily until they decided what to do with it, that nearly destroyed what was left of my spirit. Every conversation I'd overheard in the past months came flooding back. Grace complaining to her friends on the phone. She just sits there all day, contributing nothing. At least she has money we can use for the house. Edward agreeing with her, Mom's getting old anyway. She doesn't need much. The casual way they discussed my finances like they were already planning my funeral and dividing my belongings. The way they talked about me when they thought I couldn't hear, like I was already dead, like my life was over and all that remained was figuring out how to distribute my assets. The way Grace would eye my jewelry, my furniture, making mental notes about what she wanted. The way Edward would sigh dramatically whenever I needed something, like my existence was an inconvenience he was graciously tolerating. I heard Grace's footsteps leaving the house that day, her keys jingling with that confident sound of someone who thinks the world owes them everything. Her purse swinging, probably already planning how to spend MY money on things she didn't need, couldn't afford, and didn't deserve. Her high heels clicking on the pavement like a countdown to my financial execution. My heart was trembling like a leaf in a hurricane, my whole body shaking with rage and hurt and something else I hadn't felt in years, determination. But my voice? My voice didn't shake. For the first time in decades, my voice was steady as stone. I walked to my room, the small room they'd graciously allowed me to keep in what used to be my own house, and I locked the door. Not to keep them out, but to keep my resolve locked in where they couldn't manipulate it away. I picked up my old phone, the ancient flip phone they always mocked me for keeping instead of getting a smartphone. "Mom, you're so behind the times," Edward would say, like my choice to keep something simple and functional was evidence of my inadequacy. But that old phone had never let me down, never broken when I needed it most, never required expensive monthly plans I couldn't afford. I called the bank, my hands surprisingly steady. The number was worn into my memory from years of checking my balance, making sure every penny was accounted for, protecting what little security I'd managed to build. "Yes, please block that card immediately." The operator's voice was professional, kind. "May I ask the reason for the block request?" I paused, thinking about how to answer. Was it stolen? When your own son takes your card without asking, when your daughter-in-law spends your money like it's her inheritance, when they both treat your life savings like their personal piggy bank, what do you call that? Theft seemed too harsh a word for family, but what else was it? I answered softly, but with steel running through every word. Let's just say, someone has it without my permission. That moment, that single phone call lasting less than 3 minutes, was the first time in decades I'd stood up for myself. The first time I'd said no to Edward, the first time I'd chosen my own needs over his wants. The first time I'd acknowledged that my money, earned through my sacrifice, was actually mine to control. It was my declaration of independence from a family that saw me as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be respected. The operator confirmed the block would be immediate. "Is there anything else I can help you with today, ma'am?" "No," I said, and for the first time in years, I meant it. I didn't need anything else in that moment. I had done something for myself, made a choice that prioritized my dignity over their convenience, and it felt like awakening from a decades-long coma. While I was reclaiming my power with one phone call, Grace was at the mall, living it up with what she thought was unlimited access to my money. I could picture the scene perfectly because I'd watched her shop before, her cart overflowing with things she wanted but hadn't earned, strutting through the store like she owned the place, probably already mentally redecorating my house with my savings. She was the type who shopped as a form of therapy, who believed that buying things would fill whatever emptiness existed inside her. Designer handbags, expensive makeup, clothes she'd wear once and forget about. She shopped like someone who had never known scarcity, never understood the weight of a dollar earned through honest labor. The cashier swipes the card, and I imagine that beautiful moment of confusion spreading across their face like sunrise. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This card is blocked." The words hanging in the air like a death sentence for Grace's shopping spree. The silence that must have followed, thick and uncomfortable. The whispers from other customers in line, the rustling of people looking up from their own transactions to witness someone else's financial embarrassment. The cart full of dreams Grace couldn't afford, standing there like a monument to her assumptions about other people's money. I imagine her face flushing red, her voice rising in indignation. That's impossible. Try it again. The cashier, patient but firm, explaining that blocked means blocked. Grace fumbling for her own cards, probably maxed out or close to it, the reality of her actual financial situation crashing down around her like a house of cards. And where was I during her moment of retail humiliation? Sitting calmly in my kitchen, sipping tea from the china cup Edward had given me for Mother's Day years ago, back when he still remembered I was a person with feelings. It was just another peaceful evening in what used to be my home, except now it was peaceful because I had finally taken control of something, my own financial security. My phone started ringing, endlessly, desperately, angrily. Grace's number flashing on the small screen, then Edward's, then Grace's again. The sound was frantic, like alarm bells in a sinking ship. But I didn't answer. I just sat there in my quiet kitchen, tasting freedom for the first time in years. Each ring was a small victory. Each unanswered call was me choosing myself over their crisis, their embarrassment, their assumed right to my resources. I let the phone ring until it stopped, then ring again, then stop again. The silence between calls was more precious than any conversation we'd had in months. The irony was beautiful in its simplicity. Her chaos, my peace. Her panic, my calm. Her public embarrassment, my private dignity finally restored. After years of being the one who accommodated, who bent, who sacrificed my comfort for their convenience, I was finally still while they scrambled. Edward stormed into the kitchen like a tornado made of indignation and wounded pride, his face red with fury and something else, fear. Maybe he was realizing for the first time that his free ride had conditions, that his mother's generosity had limits, that I was still a human being with agency and choice. Mom, did you block the card? Grace is humiliated. The concern in his voice was all for Grace, none for me. Not Mom, are you okay? Or Mom, what happened? Just immediate accusation and anger that I had dared to inconvenience his wife. That I had dared to control my own money. I looked at my son, this grown man throwing a tantrum because his access to free money had ended, and I gave him the simplest, most honest answer I could, yes. I did. We needed things for the house, he shouted, his voice cracking like a teenager's. Like their once somehow justified taking my earnings without permission. Like needing something gave them the right to steal it from someone else, even if that someone else was the woman who had given them everything. Then use your money, I said quietly, my voice steady as bedrock. I already gave you my life. Those words hung in the air between us like a courtroom verdict. Because it was true, wasn't it? I had given him my life. My youth spent working instead of living, my energy poured into his needs instead of my own dreams, my health sacrificed to ensure his comfort. My 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, all of it devoted to making sure he had opportunities one never did. I gave him piano lessons I couldn't afford while my own musical dreams withered. I gave him college tuition that took me 10 years to pay off while I worked 3 jobs. I gave him a wedding fund that emptied my savings while I wore the same dress to the ceremony that I'd worn to his high school graduation 5 years earlier. But what did I get in return? The privilege of being treated like a burden in my own home. The honor of listening to them discuss my finances like I was already deceased. The joy of being called an all-for-nothing mom by the woman my son chose to marry and then defend. Edward stood there, his voice breaking with frustration, but for the first time in years, I stood my ground. My back was straight, my voice was clear, and my resolve was unshakable. I was done bending, done accommodating, done making myself smaller so they could feel bigger. I was done being grateful for scraps of respect in the house my sacrifices helped build. Mom, you don't understand, he said, his tone shifting from anger to pleading. Grace was counting on that money. We have expenses. Expenses, I repeated, tasting the word like poison. Like what, Edward? Like the expensive restaurants you eat at while I cook my own meals? Like the vacations you take while I haven't left this town in 5 years? Like the new car payments you can afford because you don't pay rent. His face went pale because we both knew I was right. We both knew that their lifestyle was subsidized by my presence, my unpaid labor, my financial contributions that they'd begun to see as obligations rather than gifts. Grace stormed in later, her face twisted with rage and humiliation, the venom in her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You embarrass me in front of everyone." The whole store was staring. I looked at this woman who had married my son and somehow decided that made her entitled to my life's work, my decades of sacrifice, my financial security. I looked at her with eyes that had seen real hardship, real struggle, real work, and I spoke with a calm that surprised even me. "You embarrassed yourself by stealing." The word hung between us like a curse. Stealing. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? Taking someone's property without permission, using someone's resources without consent, assuming ownership of something that wasn't yours. That's theft, no matter how you dress it up with family relationships and assumed obligations. Stealing. Grace's voice pitched higher, indignant. "We're family. That money is for all of us." "That money," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word, "is mine. I earned it. I saved it. I sacrificed for it. And being family doesn't make you entitled to it." Edward tried to mediate, tried to find some middle ground between his guilt and his pride, his love for me and his loyalty to his wife. But the truth was already spilling out like water from a broken dam, rushing forward with unstoppable force. All those little comments they thought I didn't hear, all those assumptions they thought I'd accepted, all the ways they'd slowly eroded my dignity while convincing themselves they were doing me favors. "You said I live here for free," I said, my voice growing stronger with each revelation. "You said I eat your food, that I use your utilities, that I'm a burden you graciously tolerate." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of their own words coming back to haunt them, the sound of their cruelty finally being called out, the sound of years of disrespect being laid bare. They couldn't deny it because we all knew it was true. Edward's face crumpled as he realized how his words must have sounded to me, how his casual dismissal of my contributions must have felt. But realizing the harm you've caused and taking responsibility for it are two different things entirely. "Mom, I didn't mean dash." "Yes, you did," I interrupted. "You meant every word. You meant it when you laughed at Grace calling me old and worthless. You meant it when you handed her my card like it was yours to give. You meant it every time you treated my presence like an inconvenience and my money like your inheritance." Grace tried to jump back into the argument. "We let you live here. We take care of you. Let me live here?" My voice rose for the first time, decades of suppressed anger finally finding its way to the surface. "This was my house before you ever existed in Edward's life. I paid the down payment with money I saved working 16-hour days. I made mortgage payments when Edward was too young to work, too busy with school to contribute. I maintained this house, improved this house, loved this house long before you decided it was yours to control." The truth was an avalanche that couldn't be stopped. Years of being made to feel like a guest in my own home, like a dependent when I was actually a contributor, like a burden when I was actually the foundation that made their comfortable life possible. I looked my son straight in the eye, this man I'd raised to be better than this, and I said words I never thought I'd have to say. "If I'm such a burden, then let me go." The power in the room shifted in that moment like tectonic plates rearranging themselves. They realized they'd pushed too far, taken too much, assumed too much. But I was done being their victim, done being their convenient ATM, done being the woman who absorbed their disrespect and asked for nothing in return except basic human dignity. Edward's face went white as the full implications of my words hit him. Grace, for once, was speechless. They were finally understanding that their actions had consequences, that treating people poorly eventually leads to those people choosing to leave. That night, while they slept in their guilt and their anger and their sudden uncertainty about their financial future, I quietly packed 2 suitcases. I moved through the house like a ghost, taking only what was truly mine, leaving behind everything they'd convinced me I was lucky to share. My clothes, old but clean and carefully maintained. Some photographs of happier times when Edward was small and still looked at me with love and respect instead of calculation and resentment. A small box of memories, his first drawing that he gave me for Mother's Day, a pressed flower from a rare day we spent together in the park, letters he wrote me from summer camp thanking me for making it possible. I left behind the furniture I'd bought, the dishes I'd collected over the years, the decorations that had made the house feel like home. They could have all of it. Material things could be replaced, but dignity, once lost, was much harder to recover. I wrote the note on kitchen stationery, the same paper I'd used for grocery lists and reminders, and all the small ways I'd tried to organize a life around their needs. Edward, I love you, but I love myself more. Don't look for me. Those words were the hardest I'd ever written because they were true in a way that hurt down to my bones. I did love him. I'd always love him, but I loved myself too, and I'd forgotten that for too many years. I'd forgotten that my love for him didn't require me to accept his disrespect. I'd forgotten that being a good mother didn't mean being a doormat. I'd forgotten that I had value beyond what I could provide for other people. The note was short because there wasn't much left to say. Decades of sacrifice, years of gradual disrespect, months of financial abuse, and it all came down to one simple truth: I loved myself enough to leave. I walked away at dawn, when the world was quiet and new and full of possibility. The sound of the front door closing behind me echoed through the house like Judgment Day, like the end of one life and the beginning of another. I was free, but God, I was heartbroken too. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself, and walking away from that house felt like losing everything. The place where I'd raised my child, where I'd built my dreams, where I'd thought I would grow old surrounded by family who loved me, all of it was disappearing behind me with every step. But it was also the first step toward finding the woman I used to be, the woman I'd buried under years of trying to be what everyone else needed me to be. The woman who had dreams of her own, who had worth beyond her usefulness to others, who deserved basic respect and human dignity. The morning air was cool against my face, and for the first time in years, I breathed deeply without fear of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, being the wrong thing. I was just myself, walking toward something unknown but necessarily better than what I was leaving behind. I found refuge with Linda, my lifelong friend who greeted me at her door with warmth and without a single judgment. She took one look at me standing there with my 2 suitcases and tear-stained face, and she just opened her arms. No questions, no conditions, no lectures about family obligations or forgiveness or giving people second chances they hadn't earned. "Come in, honey," she said, and those 2 words contained more kindness than I'd heard in months. For the first time in decades, I felt seen. Really seen. Not as a bank account or a burden or a convenient source of domestic labor, but as a human being with worth and dignity and a right to peace. Linda and I had been friends since we were girls, before marriage and children and all the ways life can pull you apart. She remembered who I was before I became just someone's mother, someone's financial resource, someone's domestic convenience. We shared laughter over coffee, real laughter that came from somewhere deep inside me that I'd thought was dead. We talked about books we'd read, places we'd like to visit, dreams we'd put aside, but maybe didn't have to abandon forever. We had conversations that didn't revolve around what I could do for someone else, what I could provide, what I owed. Linda's apartment was small, but the peace was enormous. The contrast was stunning, less physical space, but more emotional freedom, fewer possessions, but more dignity, a smaller living area, but a larger sense of possibility. I had a corner of her couch, a drawer for my clothes, a shelf for my few belongings, and it felt like a palace compared to the emotional poverty I'd been living in. I started to breathe again, to remember what it felt like to wake up without dread, to exist without constantly apologizing for taking up space. I remembered what it felt like to have opinions, to make choices, to matter as a person instead of just as a provider. Linda would make breakfast and ask what I wanted, like my preferences mattered. She'd suggest activities and wait for my answer, like my desires were worth considering. She treated me like I was a whole person with thoughts and feelings and rights, not just a collection of services and resources to be managed. The emotional release was like learning to breathe again after years of holding my breath. It was the soft rebirth of a soul that had been slowly dying under the weight of other people's expectations and entitlement. I cried for days, but they were cleansing tears, healing tears, the kind of crying that washes away years of accumulated pain. Weeks passed in this peaceful refuge, and I began to remember who I was before I became defined entirely by my relationship to other people. I remembered that I liked to read, that I was good at crossword puzzles, that I enjoyed cooking for people who appreciated it rather than demanded it. I remembered that I had opinions about politics and books and movies, that I was funny when I felt safe enough to be myself. I started taking walks in Linda's neighborhood, something I hadn't done in years because I'd always been too busy taking care of everyone else's needs to consider my own. The simple act of walking without purpose except my own pleasure felt revolutionary. Then one day, there was a knock on Linda's door. Through the window, I could see my son standing there, pale and broken and remorseful, looking like he'd aged years in the weeks since I'd left. His shoulders were slumped, his usually neat appearance disheveled, his confident demeanor replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Mom, I was wrong," he said when Linda opened the door, his words tumbling out like he'd rehearsed them, but couldn't quite get them right. Those words that I'd wanted to hear for so long now sounded hollow and desperate. Too little, too late, carrying the weight of desperation rather than genuine understanding. I listened from the couch, my heart breaking all over again because I could hear the little boy he used to be in his voice, the child who used to run to me with scraped knees and hurt feelings, who used to trust that I could fix anything. I listened, tears forming despite my resolve, but I didn't fold. I couldn't fold. Too much had been broken, too much trust had been shattered, too many years of dignity had been sacrificed for this moment of regret to magically fix everything. "I forgive you, Edward," I said, and I meant it with every broken piece of my heart. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'll go back. Those words hung in the air like a final verdict. Forgiveness and reconciliation weren't the same thing. I could forgive him for being thoughtless, selfish, cruel, but I didn't have to subject myself to more of the same treatment. I could love him and still protect myself from him. He learned humility that day, standing on Linda's doorstep like a child again, realizing that some choices have consequences that last longer than regret. And I taught him something about boundaries that I should have taught him years earlier, lessons that might have saved us both a lot of pain if I'd had the courage to enforce them when he was younger. Love without respect is slavery, and I was finally free. Free from the obligation to accept poor treatment because we shared DNA. Free from the assumption that being his mother meant absorbing his disrespect indefinitely. Free from the belief that my love required me to sacrifice my dignity. He cried. My grown son cried like he used to when he was small and had scraped his knee running too fast down the sidewalk. But some wounds can't be fixed with a kiss and a bandage, and some choices have consequences that last longer than the moment they're made. I wanted to comfort him, every maternal instinct in my body screaming at me to make his pain go away. But comforting him would mean going back to the same dynamic that had nearly destroyed me, the same pattern of me absorbing everyone else's problems while my own needs went unmet. "I miss you, Mom," he whispered, and those words nearly broke my resolve. "I miss you too," I said, because it was true. But missing someone isn't enough reason to go back to being hurt by them. A year later, I live alone in my own cozy apartment. My apartment, with my name on the lease, my rules on the walls, my peace filling every corner. I drink tea by the window every morning, watching the sunrise paint the world in new colors, and I think about how long it took me to learn that I deserved this peace. The apartment isn't much, one bedroom, a small living area, a kitchen barely big enough for one person. But it's mine. Every piece of furniture chosen by me, every decoration placed because I like it, every decision made with only my own preferences to consider. It's the first space I've ever had that's entirely mine, and the freedom of that is intoxicating. I may not have much left, but what I have is mine, my dignity, my space, my choices, my quiet mornings, my freedom from guilt and manipulation, and the constant pressure to be grateful for scraps of respect. I wake up every day without dreading the day ahead, without wondering what crisis I'll be expected to solve or what sacrifice I'll be expected to make. The plants on my windowsill grow toward the light, just like I finally learned to do. Green things reaching for sunshine, thriving in their small space, beautiful in their simplicity. The morning light streams through my windows, and illuminates a life that's finally, authentically mine. I'm 69 years old. And for the first time in my life, I'm living for me. Not for what people expect, not for what people need, not for what people think I owe them based on biology or history or their own sense of entitlement. For me, this is my story of finding myself after losing everything I thought mattered. This is my story of choosing dignity over convenience, self-respect over family approval, peace over the exhausting work of enabling other people's poor choices. This is my story of learning that sometimes the greatest love is the love you finally give yourself. The money they wanted so badly? I still have it. But now it represents something different. Not just 40 years of sacrifice, but 40 years of strength I didn't know I had. Not just proof that I endured, but proof that I can still choose, still change, still grow even at 69 years old. I survived raising a child alone when his father walked away. I survived decades of backbreaking work that left permanent damage to my body. I survived the betrayal of the people I loved most, the people I gave everything to, the people who should have protected me but instead chose to exploit me. I survived it all, and now, finally, I'm not just surviving. I'm living. Really living, for the first time in decades. Every sunrise in my window is a victory over despair. Every quiet cup of tea is a celebration of solitude I've learned to treasure. Every night I go to sleep in my own bed, in my own space, without listening for footsteps or criticism or demands. That's freedom more precious than anything I ever thought I wanted. This is what it sounds like when a woman finally stops apologizing for existing. This is what it sounds like when sacrifice transforms from martyrdom into self-respect. This is what it sounds like when you realize that loving someone doesn't mean you have to let them destroy you. I'm 69 and I'm finally home. Not in a building, not in a family that takes more than it gives, but in myself. In the quiet strength I've always had but never honored. In the dignity I gave away for so many years but finally reclaimed. And that, after all these years of searching for where I belonged, is exactly where I was meant to be all along.